My son locked me in the basement for 2 days because I touched the circuit breaker. No food, no chair, just cold concrete and the steady drip of water from an old pipe above my head. I could hear him laughing upstairs with his wife while I sat in the dark, counting seconds. I gave that boy my whole life, and he gave me a locked door. When he finally opened it, I said nothing. But in my mind, I already knew what I was going to do next. Before I tell you what I did, comment where you're watching from and what time it is there right now. And please subscribe, because maybe, somewhere out there, another father needs to hear this. My name is Arthur Reed, and this happened in Chicago. When people talk about Chicago, they think of the skyline, the cold winds, the hard-working people. For me, this city is built on memory. Every brick, every nail, every scar. After my wife Emily died in a car crash 28 years ago, I was left with one job: raising our son Michael alone. He was 8 years old. Too young to understand death, too old to be shielded from it. The morning of the funeral he asked me, "Dad, where's Mom's car?" I couldn't answer. I just placed my hand on his shoulder and promised him we'd make it through, no matter what. I worked wherever I could, days at the steel factory, nights repairing engines at a garage on Western Avenue. Sometimes, when I'd come home at dawn, he'd already be getting ready for school, sitting by the kitchen table, eating cold cereal, his eyes half closed from sleep. I'd ruffle his hair and whisper, "Don't worry, buddy. One day you'll never have to struggle like me." That promise became my religion. Every raise, every overtime shift, every cut and bruise on my hands had one purpose: to build a future for him. I skipped new shoes so he could have baseball cleats. I sold my car so he could attend a science camp he'd begged for. When his friends teased him about not having a mother, I'd show up at every game, every recital, just so he never felt alone in the crowd. Sometimes I think he never realized what those long nights cost me. Maybe that's what happens when you protect someone too much. They grow up thinking protection is endless. When he graduated from college mechanical engineering, just like me, I cried in silence. Not because I was proud, though I was, because I thought it was over. The pain, the debt, the endless work. I thought, now it's his turn to build, and my turn to rest. A few years later, he met Lena, a sharp-tongued realtor, with a smile that could charm anyone and a voice that could slice through steel. She was polite at first, even warm. She called me Mr. Reed, baked me pies on holidays, asked for stories about Emily, but there was something in her eyes, a glint, that measured everything in terms of worth. When they announced their engagement, Michael said, "Dad, I want to give Lena a good life. I want her to feel secure." So I did what any father would do. I gave him the house. The one I'd spent 30 years paying off. The one Emily and I had dreamed about before the accident. I handed him the keys on his wedding day and said, "It's yours now. Build your family here." He hugged me, tight at first, then brief, like a man too excited to linger in gratitude. I didn't tell him that the deed was still in my name. It was meant as a simple formality, a tax precaution, something the lawyer had advised after Emily's death. I never thought it would matter. After they got married, I moved into the basement guest room. It wasn't much, just a small bed, an old desk, and a single window that let in slivers of daylight between the bricks. But I didn't mind. I wanted to give them space. I told myself, "You've done enough. Let them live their life." I cooked my own meals, cleaned up after myself, paid the utility bills even though they said I didn't have to. I thought peace came from staying out of their way. For a while, it worked. We shared Sunday dinners. Lena would talk about her open houses, and Michael would brag about the construction contracts he'd won. They made plans, laughed about buying a cabin someday, and I'd sit there quietly, smiling, pretending not to notice that they never asked about my day. Then came the small changes, the things you only notice once the warmth starts to fade. A sigh when I asked a question. A glance exchanged between them when I walked into the room. The way Michael began calling the basement Dad's space, as if it wasn't all under one roof. Sometimes I'd hear them upstairs, voices low but words sharp. "Your father's habits make clients uncomfortable," Lena would say. "He's harmless," Michael would answer, though even in his defense, there was exhaustion. One night, I overheard them talking about selling the house. Lena said, "If we move closer to downtown, I could double my income." Michael replied, "We can't. The mortgage is in Dad's name." That silence that followed, heavy, thick, was the moment something cracked between us. Not a loud break, just a quiet shift. The kind that feels small until it swallows everything. From that night forward, I felt it. The house no longer echoed with laughter. It felt like I was living inside someone else's walls. Still, I said nothing. A father's instinct is to believe silence can fix what words might break. I didn't realize then that silence was exactly what would destroy me. If you had told me back then that my own son, the boy whose tears I wiped away, whose future I built with the bones of my body, would one day lock me underground like a burden he was tired of carrying, I would have called you cruel. But cruelty has a strange way of growing slowly. It doesn't come as a storm. It seeps in through the cracks of love, until one day, you look around, and you don't recognize the home you built. That's how it began. In a house built from love, I started to feel like a stranger. And soon, I'd learn just how cold a house can become when gratitude turns into resentment. It started small, so small, I told myself not to take it personally. Michael would sigh when I left a light on in the hallway, or when I forgot to close the cabinet doors all the way. Lena began pointing out my habits as if she were keeping score. "Arthur, you're using too much detergent again. Arthur, that coffee smell sticks to the curtains." Each word had a polite smile attached, but the smile never reached her eyes. At first, I laughed it off. I thought maybe they were stressed, trying to build a life together. I told myself it wasn't easy sharing space with an old man, so I made myself smaller. I stopped cooking in the kitchen and started making simple meals in the basement: a sandwich, soup from a can, black coffee. The less noise I made, the fewer complaints I'd have to hear. But peace never lasts when it depends on one person staying silent. Soon, the comments turned into corrections. Then the corrections turned into rules. Michael taped a note by the thermostat that read, 68 degrees Fahrenheit maximum. He said it was to save money. Another note appeared near the water heater. No long showers. I stared at it for a long time the night he put it up. The handwriting was neat, almost casual, but I knew what it really meant. This wasn't my house anymore. One afternoon, I came home from the grocery store with 2 bags of food, milk, bread, eggs, and the brand of coffee I'd been drinking for 30 years. Lena was in the kitchen, unpacking takeout. She didn't even look up when I walked in. When she finally glanced at my bags, she frowned. "You don't need to buy so much milk. It goes bad before we finish it." I nodded quietly, though the words stung more than I expected. I wanted to tell her that I'd been buying milk in that kitchen since before she knew our last name, but I didn't. That evening, I heard them arguing behind the closed bedroom door. Lena's voice was sharp. "He needs to move out, Michael. It's too crowded here." My son's voice came softer, almost pleading. "He's my dad, Lena. He's got nowhere else." Her reply came like a knife. He had his life. This is ours now. I sat on the basement stairs listening, my hand gripping the railing. For the first time, I understood what they really thought of me. Not as a father, not even as family. I was an inconvenience, a leftover from another life. After that, the house began to change. Lena redecorated, painting over the colors Emily and I had chosen. The framed photos of our family disappeared from the hallway one by one. When I asked about them, Michael said, "They're in storage. We just wanted a cleaner look." But the walls looked naked, stripped of history. I realized I was watching my life erased in slow motion. Michael wasn't cruel outright. He never yelled at me in public. But there was a distance now, a coolness in his eyes when he looked at me. If I asked a question, he'd answer without looking up from his phone. If I tried to start a conversation at dinner, he'd say, "Dad, I'm tired. Let's talk later." Later never came. Sometimes, when Lena wasn't home, Michael would sit with me for a while. We'd watch sports in silence, just like we used to when he was a kid. I'd glance at him and see flashes of the boy I raised, the one who used to fall asleep on my shoulder during late-night games. But then, Lena's car would pull into the driveway, and he'd get up immediately, muttering something about work emails or needing to check on dinner. It wasn't her fault alone, I knew that, but she had become the mirror he wanted to impress, and in that reflection, there was no room left for me. Winter came early that year. I remember it because the cold seeped into the basement faster than ever. The window barely kept out the wind. I started wearing 2 sweaters just to sleep. One morning, I woke up to find the space heater unplugged. A small sticky note sat on top of it. Energy bills are high. Use blankets. I stood there, holding that note in my hand, and for a moment, I felt something deeper than anger. Something hollow. I had worked my entire life to give that boy warmth, and now I was being rationed like a stranger in my own home. But I still couldn't let go of hope. I told myself, every family goes through rough patches. Maybe he just needed time to appreciate everything I'd done. Maybe once he had kids of his own, he'd understand the weight of sacrifice. Then one night, I overheard a phone call that shattered whatever hope I had left. Michael was in the kitchen, talking quietly, but his words carried through the vent that connected to my room. He was speaking to someone from the bank. "No, my father doesn't need to know about the loan," he said. "The house paperwork is complicated, but it's fine. We'll figure it out." My stomach dropped. He was using my house, my name, for something I hadn't signed. Debt, risk, lies. When he hung up, I lay awake the entire night staring at the ceiling. I tried to justify it, to tell myself maybe he just needed temporary help, that he'd tell me in time. But deep down, I knew the truth. My generosity had turned into his entitlement. Somewhere along the way, he stopped seeing the man who built the foundation under his feet. Now, he only saw the old man standing in the way of what he wanted next. The next morning, I made coffee and waited for him to come down. When he did, I asked gently, "Everything all right, son?" He didn't meet my eyes. "Yeah, Dad, fine. Don't worry about it." Then he added, "Hey, about the shower last night, could you keep it shorter?" Lena said the hot water ran out again. He said it casually, as if we were talking about the weather. But that sentence would turn into the storm that changed everything. I nodded. Of course. He walked away without another word, unaware that with every step he took, he was walking further away from the father who once gave him everything. I looked around that kitchen, the sunlight on the counter, the smell of fresh paint, the empty space where our family pictures used to hang, and realized the truth. Love can't survive where respect has died. And in that house, mine had been buried long before I ever knew it. That was the last quiet morning before the storm. The next time Michael would raise his voice, it wouldn't just be words that hurt. It would be a locked door, and the sound of a key turning in the dark. The night it happened was colder than usual. The kind of Chicago night when the wind feels like it carries knives. I remember because the furnace had been acting up all week. The heat flickered on and off, making the air thick with that metallic smell of burnt dust. I was in my room downstairs, reading an old book, when the lights suddenly went out. The whole house fell into darkness. At first, I thought it was just a tripped breaker. It wasn't the first time the power had cut out in this old place. So I grabbed my flashlight, pulled on my slippers, and headed toward the basement utility panel. I knew every inch of that house, the steps that creaked, the door that always stuck halfway shut. It was muscle memory. I opened the panel and flipped the breaker switch. The lights upstairs flickered back to life, and for a second I smiled, proud that I'd fixed something before my son even noticed. But then I heard the footsteps. Heavy, fast, angry. The basement door swung open so hard it slammed against the wall. "What the hell are you doing down here?" Michael's voice was sharp, louder than I'd ever heard it. "The power went out," I said calmly. "I just reset the breaker." He stormed down the steps, his face red, jaw tight. "You don't touch that, Dad. You don't touch anything in this house without asking me first." I blinked at him, confused. "It's a breaker box, Michael. I've been fixing that thing since before you were born." But he wasn't listening. Behind him, I heard Lena's voice from upstairs. "Don't yell, just deal with it." Michael stepped closer. The smell of whiskey hit my nose. His eyes were glassy, not drunk, but not sober either. "You think you can just keep running things here? You think this is still your house?" Something in me went cold. "I'm sorry, son. I didn't mean." "Just stay down here," he snapped. You're always messing things up. Every time I try to fix something, you make it worse." He turned toward the stairs. I took a step forward. "Michael, wait." And then I heard it. The metallic click of the lock sliding into place. At first, I thought I imagined it. I reached for the handle, twisted it. It didn't move. The door wouldn't budge. "Michael?" I called. "Michael, open the door." No answer. I knocked louder. "Michael!" From upstairs came the muffled sound of his voice, calm now, almost casual. "Just stay down there until I figure out the heater." "Michael, that's not funny." But then I heard the TV turn on. And laughter. Lena's laughter. I stood there in the dark, my hand still gripping the cold doorknob, realizing it wasn't a mistake. The anger didn't come right away. It was disbelief first. I kept thinking, he'll open it in a minute. He'll realize what he's done. Minutes passed. Then an hour. The basement was freezing. The cement floor sucked the heat out of my legs. I found an old paint tarp and wrapped it around myself, but it barely helped. My flashlight dimmed until it died completely, leaving me in pitch blackness. I called his name again, softer this time. "Son, please." Nothing. That first night stretched on forever. I sat against the wall, listening to the faint hum of the furnace kicking in upstairs warmth that I couldn't reach. Every few hours I'd hear footsteps, the clink of glasses, the muted sound of a sitcom. Once, I thought I heard them laughing about me. I tried to sleep, but the floor was too hard. The pain in my back grew until I couldn't tell if the ache was from the cold or from something breaking inside me. I drank water from a rusted pipe that dripped near the old washer. It tasted like metal. My stomach growled, but there was nothing to eat. By morning, the light seeping through the small basement window told me a day had passed. I waited for footsteps coming down, for an apology, a plate of food, anything. But no one came. Instead, I heard Lena upstairs talking on the phone. "He'll be fine," she said, laughing softly. "He needs to learn boundaries." Boundaries. The word burned through me. I tried the door again. I kicked it, pounded it, shouted until my throat hurt. My voice bounced off the walls, empty and useless. No one answered. That night, I stopped shouting. Something shifted inside me like a gear locking into place. I realized I could die down there, and they wouldn't notice until the smell reached them. That was when the fear turned into clarity. In the silence, I thought about every sacrifice I'd made. The nights working overtime so Michael could have new shoes. The weekends fixing his car. The house I built with my bare hands. And now, I was sitting in the basement of that same house, treated like a mistake that wouldn't go away. It was almost poetic in a cruel way. The second day blurred together. I counted time by sound, the clock upstairs chiming, the footsteps crossing from kitchen to living room. Around evening, I heard Lena say, "Shouldn't we let him out?" And Michael reply, "He's fine. He needs to cool off." Cool off. By then my hands were shaking, not just from cold but from rage. Not wild, screaming rage, something quieter, something sharper. The kind that doesn't want to hurt, only to end things. When the door finally opened on the morning of the third day, the light hit my eyes like a knife. Michael stood there, holding a mug of coffee, his tone casual. "Don't touch the breaker again," that was all. No apology. No explanation. Just rules. I looked at him, and for the first time, I didn't see my son. I saw a stranger standing where my boy used to be. He turned to leave, but before he could walk away, I said quietly, "You should have left me down there longer." He frowned. "Why?" I looked him straight in the eye. "Because now, I'm not staying." He laughed, thinking I was bluffing. Then he walked off, sipping his coffee like nothing had happened. But in that moment, I made a silent promise to myself. I would never beg for respect again. The next time that door closed behind me, it wouldn't be from the inside of a basement. It would be from the outside of a life I no longer belonged to. After that morning, everything looked the same, but nothing felt the same. The walls, the furniture, the sunlight that came through the kitchen window, all of it seemed to belong to someone else now. I moved through that house like a guest waiting for permission to leave. But this time I wasn't waiting for his permission. I was waiting for the right moment. Michael thought the silence meant surrender. He thought locking me up had taught me obedience. What he didn't know was that silence, for people like me, is never weakness, it's strategy. That afternoon, while he and Lena were out, I opened the old toolbox I kept under the basement stairs. Inside were things that time had forgotten: rusted wrenches, dusty screws, and an old key wrapped in a cloth. The key to my safe? The safe was behind a loose wall panel in my room. It hadn't been opened in years. Inside were the papers I hadn't touched since Emily's death: the house deed, insurance documents, and our original mortgage contract. Right there, on the first line of the deed, was my name. Arthur Reed. Not Michael, not Lena, mine. I stared at those letters for a long time. They looked heavier now, like they carried every bruise and sleepless night I had ever endured. That piece of paper was more than ownership. It was proof that no matter how much he had tried to take from me, I still had the one thing he couldn't touch: control. That evening, I called Patrick Collins, my oldest friend, and the man who had been my attorney for decades. Patrick was quiet at first as I told him everything: the shouting, the debt, the 2 days locked underground. When I finished, he exhaled softly. "Arthur, I'm sorry. You don't deserve that. But you should know something. I've seen your son's name come up on a few questionable loan files. He's been using the property as collateral." The words hit me like cold water. "Collateral?" I repeated. "Unofficially, he can't legally do it without your consent, but it looks like he's been trying." There was a pause. "Patrick," I said quietly, "I want to sell the house." He hesitated. "You sure about that?" "More sure than I've ever been. But it has to be quiet. No public listing, no signs. I don't want them to know until I'm gone." Patrick agreed to handle everything privately. He knew a developer who'd been eyeing properties in this neighborhood for months, a cash buyer who could move fast. He told me it could all be done within 3 weeks. 3 weeks, 21 days, to erase the past 30 years. That night, I sat by the small window in my basement room, watching the snow fall outside. It was strange, the peace I felt. Not relief, not joy. Something steadier. When a man decides he's had enough, even the cold feels warmer. Over the next few days, I played my role perfectly. At breakfast, I smiled. I asked Michael about work. I asked Lena about her clients. I nodded when they talked about remodeling the kitchen or buying new furniture. I even offered to pay part of the heating bill, pretending I was trying to make amends. They believed it. Why wouldn't they? To them, I was harmless now, the quiet old man who'd finally learned to stay in his place. But while they were at work, I was preparing my exit. I gathered the documents I needed, photocopied everything, and locked the originals inside a small folder that would go straight to Patrick. I began transferring small amounts of money from my checking account into a new account under my name, only an account Michael didn't know existed. Every evening, I made one withdrawal, just a few $100s, to avoid suspicion. I kept the cash hidden behind the furnace panel. Each night before I went to bed, I'd sit at my desk and make a list. 1. Confirm buyer paperwork. 2. Sign closing documents with Patrick. 3. Transfer funds to Michigan account. 4. Book ticket. 5. Leave before dawn. Simply, quiet. Finale. The hardest part wasn't the planning, it was the pretending. Every time I saw Michael walk past me, I remembered the sound of the lock turning from the other side of the door. Every time Lena laughed, I heard the echo of her voice upstairs saying, "He'll be fine. He needs to learn boundaries." My jaw would tighten, but I'd force a smile. I couldn't afford anger. Not yet. 2 weeks passed like that, each day a performance, each smile a disguise. The buyer had confirmed. The deal was almost ready to close. Patrick called one evening, his voice calm but cautious. "Arthur, once you sign, it's done. You'll be out completely." "I know," I said. He paused. "And what about them?" I thought about it for a moment, then answered softly, "They'll be fine. They'll have to be." On the night before the closing, I walked through the house one last time. Up the stairs, through the kitchen, down the hallway, lined with walls that used to hold our family photos. Now there were only blank frames Lena had hung as modern decor. It was fitting, empty frames for an empty family. I paused by the living room window and looked outside. The streetlights glowed on the snow, the same soft orange they had on the night I first brought Michael home from the hospital. Back then, I had stood in that same spot, holding a baby in my arms and whispering, "Everything I have is yours." And now, decades later, I was taking those words back. Before going to bed, I wrote a short note and placed it in the drawer of the kitchen table. "Michael, you took my kindness for weakness and my silence for submission. But you forgot one thing: I built this house. Every nail, every wall, every inch of it was paid with my hands. You locked me in the dark once, but this time, I'm turning out the lights myself. By the time you read this, you'll understand what it means to lose everything you thought was yours, Dad." I folded the note and left it there. That night, I slept better than I had in years. The kind of sleep that comes only when a man knows tomorrow he'll be free. The next morning, everything seemed painfully normal. The kind of normal that hides what's really about to happen. The house smelled like burnt toast and Lena's perfume. The radio hummed softly in the kitchen, while Michael scrolled through his phone, half listening to the weather forecast. He didn't know that by sunset, the house he was sitting in would no longer belong to him. I moved quietly through the morning, making coffee, acting like nothing had changed. I even asked Michael if he needed help shoveling the driveway. He shrugged, not even looking up. "No, Dad, don't overdo it." If he had looked at me long enough, maybe he would have noticed something different. My eyes didn't flinch anymore. My voice didn't tremble. The fear was gone. But people rarely notice when the person they underestimate stops caring. Patrick called around noon. I answered from the basement, pretending to check the fuse box again. "It's done," he said. "Funds will be wired by this afternoon. You're officially clear." "Thank you, Patrick." There was a pause. "Arthur, are you ready for what happens after?" I smiled faintly, even though he couldn't see it. "I've been ready since the day that door locked." I slipped my phone into my pocket and took a deep breath. The air smelled like dust and old paint, the same smell that used to remind me of work, of sweat, of building. Now it smelled like closure. Upstairs, Lena was talking on speakerphone. I could hear every word through the vent. "I told you, once the refinance goes through, we'll be fine," she said. "Michael's father's name is still on it, but he won't even notice. He's practically senile." I froze. Her voice dropped lower, but I could still catch pieces. "Yeah, Evan, just a few more weeks, then I'm gone. I'm not living in this dump forever." That name, Evan. I didn't know him, but her tone told me everything. She wasn't planning a future with my son. She was planning her exit. It hit me how deep the rot had gone. Michael was using my name to cover debts he couldn't pay, and Lena was using him to cover her own escape. They both thought I was too old, too quiet, too harmless to see what was happening. For the rest of that day, I barely spoke. I didn't need to. I had already won. Late that evening, Michael came home carrying a bottle of whiskey. He poured himself a glass and sat across from me at the table. "You've been quiet lately," he said, swirling the drink. "Just tired," I replied. He nodded. "Lena says we might refinance the house soon. Roof needs repairs." "Does it?" I asked softly. He hesitated, maybe sensing something in my tone, but then shrugged. "Yeah, I'll handle it." For a long moment, neither of us spoke. The clock ticked between us like a slow metronome. Then he said something that told me everything about who he'd become. "You know, Dad, sometimes I think you don't appreciate how much I let you stay here." The words hung in the air. I stared at him. Not with anger, just clarity. How much he let me stay here. The man who had once lived under my roof, fed by my hands, now saw himself as my keeper. I wanted to laugh, but I didn't. I just nodded, sipping my coffee. "You're right, son. I should be more grateful." He smiled, satisfied, not realizing that every sip of whiskey he took was one step closer to losing everything. That night, when they went to bed, I sat at the kitchen table for hours. The house was quiet except for the sound of wind against the window and the faint hum of the refrigerator. In that silence, I remembered something Emily used to say whenever life got cruel. "Arthur, sometimes the only way to save yourself is to let something go before it kills you." I had finally learned what she meant. By morning, the transfer had cleared. Patrick texted me the confirmation. Funds received. Transaction finalized. You're free. I folded my hands, whispering a small prayer, not for forgiveness, not for luck, but for finality. I went about my morning routine as usual, even making breakfast. I cooked eggs for them one last time. Lena didn't thank me. She never did. Michael ate half his plate, glanced at his phone, and left for work with his usual quick wave. As soon as the door closed, I looked around the kitchen one last time. The mug I always used. The scar on the counter from when Michael was 10 and spilled soup. The faint pencil marks on the doorway where I used to measure his height every year. Every inch of this house carried my fingerprints, and by nightfall, it would carry strangers. Lena left around noon. I watched her car drive away. Her phone pressed to her ear. Probably Evan again. The house was empty now. And that was when the quiet hit me. The kind of quiet that isn't peace, but release. I went down to my room, opened my suitcase, and packed everything I truly owned. A few shirts, my passport, my late wife's photograph, the wristwatch I'd worn on our wedding day. That was all. The rest of it, furniture, clothes, dishes, none of it mattered. Before I closed the suitcase, I took one last look at the deed, now stamped with the sale confirmation. The paper felt warm in my hands, like it had its own pulse. I smiled and whispered, "Goodbye, old friend." As I zipped the bag, I heard tires screeching outside, then voices angry, confused. I walked to the window and peeked through the curtain. A white truck was parked in front of the house. Two men in safety vests were unloading clipboards and boxes. One of them knocked on the door. I didn't move. Through the thin glass, I heard one of them say, "We're here for the property inspection. Ownership transfer cleared yesterday." A strange calm washed over me. It had begun. Inside, the walls seemed to hum, like they were finally exhaling after holding their breath for too long. I sat down on the edge of my bed, suitcase beside me, and waited. Upstairs, the front door opened. Lena's voice rose in confusion. "Excuse me? What do you mean, new ownership?" I smiled. I could almost hear her panic through the floorboards. Everything was unfolding exactly the way it was meant to. By the time Michael came home, this place, the one he called his, would belong to someone else. And by the time he realized it, I'd be long gone. By dawn the next day, the sky above Chicago was gray and heavy, the kind of morning that smells like snow before it falls. I woke before my alarm, though I hadn't really slept. The night had been too quiet, too long. Every tick of the clock sounded like a countdown. My suitcase sat by the door, small and worn, the same one I'd taken to my honeymoon decades ago. Now it held only the things that still mattered: Emily's photograph, my passport, a few shirts, the old wristwatch that had survived more winters than I could count. Everything else I left behind. Let the new owners take it. Let the memories stay buried in the walls. I wrote one last letter to Patrick, sealed it, and left it on my pillow. It read simply, "The house is yours to hand over. I'm leaving now. Thank you, old friend, for helping me end this quietly." Then I walked through the basement one final time. The same place where I had once sat in the dark, cold and forgotten, now felt almost sacred. It wasn't a prison anymore, it was a memory, and I was free of it. Upstairs, I heard the faint rumble of a truck pulling to the curb. Through the blinds, I could see the developer's inspection team stepping out, clipboards in hand. It was time. I took one long breath and opened the door. The winter air hit my face, sharp and clean, a baptism of cold freedom. The taxi was already waiting a few houses down, engine running, exhaust curling into the morning air. I locked the door behind me and slipped the keys into an envelope marked for Patrick. When the lawyer arrived later, he'd deliver them to the new owners. By then, I'd be far away. As I reached the end of the driveway, I glanced once at the house. The curtains were drawn, the lights off. It looked peaceful, like it was holding its breath, before waking up to the storm that was coming. I didn't smile. I didn't need to. Some victories are quiet, because they don't need witnesses. The cab driver, a middle-aged man with tired eyes, helped me with my bag. "Heading to the airport?" "Yes," I said softly. "O'Hare." He nodded, glanced at me through the mirror. "Early flight?" "Just one. I've waited for a long time." As the taxi rolled down the street, I looked back only once. The house grew smaller in the rearview mirror until it disappeared behind the gray morning haze. For 30 years, it had been everything I worked for. Now, it was just another address I'd left behind. While the driver hummed along to the radio, I imagined what would happen when Michael woke up. I could see it clearly. He'd shuffle into the kitchen, still half asleep, looking for coffee. Then he'd hear the noise outside, the sound of trucks, strangers talking. He'd open the door and find the workers there, carrying boxes and measuring tape. "What's going on?" he'd ask, his voice already sharp. And they'd answer calmly, "We're here for the property transfer, sir. You'll need to vacate today." He'd laugh at first, thinking it was some mistake. Then he'd call me, probably dozens of times. My phone, of course, would already be off. By the time he reached Patrick, the transaction would be sealed, the funds transferred, and the deed legally under a new name. He'd realize that every plan, every lie, every word he'd thrown at me in arrogance had turned to dust. I didn't need to imagine Lena's reaction. She'd scream first, then cry, then call that man I'd overheard her whispering to. But by then, she'd already be out of options. People who build their lives on deception always think they can negotiate with consequences. They never can. The taxi merged onto the highway, the skyline of Chicago rising behind me, steel, smoke, and the ghost of every year I'd worked myself into exhaustion for a family that had forgotten what love cost. As the plane took off an hour later, I watched the city shrink below the clouds. The streets, the blocks, the house, all of it vanished into a sheet of white and gray. I expected to feel triumph, maybe even satisfaction. But what I felt was lighter than that, like air after rain. I landed in Michigan just before noon. Patrick had already arranged everything. The bank account, the wire transfer, even the small lakeside cabin I'd bought under my own name. The cabin wasn't much, a single floor, cedar walls, a small dock that stretched into the frozen water. But when I stepped inside, the silence there didn't hurt. It healed. That night, I sat by the window, a mug of coffee warming my hands, and watched the snow fall over the lake. The reflection of the fireplace flickered on the glass, and for the first time in years, I didn't feel watched. No voices upstairs, no footsteps pacing, no judgment, just peace. I thought about calling Michael one last word, one explanation, but then I remembered the look on his face when he locked that door. No remorse, no hesitation. That moment had told me everything. There are things words can't fix. Some lessons have to arrive in silence. A few days later, Patrick called. I could hear the smile in his voice. "Everything's done, Arthur. The funds cleared, and the developer's team has moved in." Michael showed up at my office demanding answers. "And what did you tell him?" I asked. "I told him the truth, that his father sold his own house, legally and quietly, that's all." I pictured my son's face, how his mouth would open but no words would come out. The way confusion would turn into disbelief, disbelief into rage, and rage into something smaller, understanding. He'd realized that the man he called weak had outsmarted him without raising his voice. "Thank you, Patrick," I said. He hesitated. "You sure you don't want me to give him your address?" I looked out at the frozen lake, its surface calm, reflecting the pale sky. "No," I said softly. "If he wants to find me, he'll have to start by finding himself." When the call ended, I closed my eyes and listened to the creak of the cabin in the wind. It wasn't empty, it was alive. Every sound was a reminder that I'd finally escaped the silence that used to suffocate me. Somewhere back in Chicago, my son was learning what it feels like to be locked out, only this time the key wasn't lost. I had taken it with me. When I woke the next morning, the snow outside my cabin had softened into a silver blanket. The lake lay perfectly still, frozen over, the world quiet except for the hum of the heater. I poured myself a cup of coffee and stood by the window, watching the first light of day creep over the trees. It felt strange, this calm, like standing on the other side of a storm and realizing it's finally over. But 300 miles away, in Chicago, the storm had just begun. Patrick told me later how it unfolded. At around 8 that morning, the developer's moving team arrived with their paperwork and keys. The locks had already been changed. When Michael stepped outside, barefoot, hair disheveled, coffee in hand. He froze at the sight of the trucks parked across the lawn. "What the hell is this?" he barked. One of the workers, a man in a reflective vest, looked at his clipboard. "You must be Mr. Reed. We're here for the transfer inspection. You'll need to clear out your belongings by noon." Michael laughed, one of those hollow laughs people make when reality hasn't settled in yet. "You've got the wrong house." But then he saw the contract. His father's signature printed clearly at the bottom. Arthur J. Reed. The date stamped. The legal seal affixed. Every detail in order. The color drained from his face. Lena came rushing out a few minutes later, wearing her robe, phone in hand. "Who are these people?" "Michael, what's happening?" He didn't answer. He just stood there, staring at the paper, his jaw working silently, like his mind was fighting the math. When she realized what it meant, her voice turned sharp. "You told me this house was yours. You said your father transferred everything years ago." "I thought he did," Michael shouted back. "You thought?" She threw up her hands, turning on her heels. "You told me to quit my job because we were set. I left everything for you, Michael." Their voices carried down the street. Neighbors stepped out to watch, half curious, half embarrassed. The same neighbors who used to wave politely every morning now whispered from their porches. While they argued, one of the movers began unscrewing the mailbox. Another rolled up the welcome mat. It was over, and everyone but them seemed to know it. By 10, Michael's phone was full of missed calls from his clients, from the bank, from anyone who could still pretend to care. Then he noticed one voicemail short, from Patrick Collins. "Mr. Reed, I think you should come by my office. There's something you need to see." When he arrived, Patrick handed him an envelope. It was creased at the edges, the handwriting neat and steady. On the front, "To my son Michael." Patrick stayed silent while Michael read. "You locked me in the dark to teach me a lesson. You said I didn't respect your house. Now you've learned it was never yours to begin with. I built that home, paid for every nail, every brick, every inch of its foundation. You forgot that respect isn't owed, it's earned. I don't hate you, son, I pity you. Because someday you'll understand that control isn't power, it's fear. You've lived your whole life afraid of not being enough. I hope losing everything teaches you that what you took for granted was love, not weakness. Don't come looking for me. I'm alive and I'm free. And for the first time in years, I hope you find something real to build something you can't destroy. Dad." When Michael finished reading, he looked up at Patrick, eyes unfocused, lips trembling. "Where is he?" "I can't tell you that," Patrick said simply. "He asked me not to." Michael's jaw clenched. "You helped him do this?" Patrick sighed. "No, I helped him finish what you started." Michael slammed his fist on the desk, then turned and stormed out. That afternoon, the bank called. The loans he'd taken under false pretenses were due immediately. Without the house as collateral, every debt came crashing down. By evening, his truck was repossessed. By the end of the week, Lena was gone, vanished, without a note. The neighbors said they saw her leave with 2 suitcases and a man waiting in a silver sedan. For days after, Michael tried to reach me. Dozens of calls, hundreds of texts, each one angrier than the last. "How could you do this to me? You've ruined my life." "You're my father!" I never answered. One night Patrick called to update me. His tone was softer this time. "He's lost everything, Arthur. Business, marriage, house. He's staying at a friend's place. He looks hollow." "I see," I said quietly. Patrick hesitated. "Do you want me to give him your number?" I stared out at the lake. The moonlight shimmered across the ice like a second sky. "No, he's not ready to hear me, and I'm done shouting into locked doors." For a long while, neither of us spoke. Then Patrick said something I'll never forget. "You know, Arthur, he might hate you for the rest of his life." "I know," I replied. "But he'll have to live long enough to understand why I did it. And that's enough." When the call ended, I sat alone with the quiet. It wasn't lonely, it was earned. I poured myself another cup of coffee and walked out onto the porch. The air was sharp, my breath visible in the cold. Somewhere across the frozen lake, a coyote howled, its voice stretching through the night like a song of survival. I thought of Emily. She would have told me I'd done the right thing, but also that my heart would ache for him anyway. She'd be right on both counts. I took the letter I'd written for myself from my coat pocket and read it under the porch light. When love turns into control, you don't win by fighting back. You win by walking away. Quiet doesn't mean defeated, it means free. I folded it carefully and slipped it into the pages of Emily's old book of poems. In the distance, snow began to fall again. Slow, steady, endless. Each flake seemed to erase a little more of what came before. Somewhere in Chicago, my son was learning what it meant to lose something he thought was permanent. And somewhere by this lake, I was learning what it meant to live without fear. The same door he once locked behind me was now locked between us forever. And for the first time, I was the one holding the key. The wind outside my cabin carried the soft hiss of falling snow. The world was still. It had been 3 months since I left Chicago. 3 months since the house was sold. 3 months since I stopped checking my phone for messages that would never bring peace. Every morning, I wake before sunrise and make coffee the way Emily used to, slow, patient, without rush. I sit by the window as the sky blushes pink and gold, watching the lake breathe beneath the mist. In this quiet corner of Michigan, time moves differently. Here, silence doesn't hurt, it heals. There are no locks on my doors now, just the sound of wind and the creak of old wood when the temperature shifts. I sometimes think back to those 2 days in the bathroom, the smell of damp air, the ache in my back, the taste of metal from the sink water. It should have been the memory that broke me, but instead, it became the one that set me free. People say forgiveness is strength. Maybe that's true, but I've learned something else. Sometimes freedom is stronger than forgiveness. You don't always need to make peace with the person who hurt you. You just need to stop letting them decide when you can breathe. I used to think family was unbreakable. That blood was enough to hold love together. But now I know the truth. Love isn't what you give, it's what they choose to keep. And my son, somewhere deep inside him, chose pride instead of love, control instead of respect. He thought power meant winning. He never understood that real power is being able to walk away without hating. Sometimes I wonder what he's doing now. Whether he found another place to live, whether he still blames me, or whether he's finally quieted the anger long enough to understand what I tried to teach him. Maybe he's sitting somewhere, thinking about the day he locked that door. Maybe he finally realizes that when he turned the key, he wasn't just shutting me out, he was locking himself inside a world he couldn't control. I don't hate him. I can't. Hate is just another kind of prison, and I've lived in enough of those. A few days ago, a letter came in the mail from Patrick. Inside was a photograph, an old one, from when Michael was 8. He's sitting on my shoulders, both of us covered in paint from fixing his bedroom walls. Emily must have taken it. She always loved catching us off guard. I looked at that picture for a long time. The boy in it was laughing, his hands gripping my hair, his cheeks flushed with joy. He had no idea what the future would turn him into, and I had no idea that the house we were painting would one day become my cage. I didn't cry when I saw it. I smiled, because for a moment, I remembered who he used to be and who I still am. A man who gave everything and still has enough left to keep going. Sometimes, the locals here ask about my family. I tell them bits and pieces enough to satisfy curiosity, but never the full truth. They know me as Mr. Reed, the quiet man who rents the cabin by the lake and fixes things around town for free. I fix fences, unclog pipes, paint walls. It's strange how the same hands that once built a house that became a prison now build for strangers who still believe in kindness. One evening, while helping the cafe owner repair her sign, she asked, "Don't you ever get lonely?" I looked up at the twilight sky, the first star flickering between clouds. "Lonely?" I said. "No, I was lonely long before I came here. This is peace." At night, I read Emily's old poetry collection by the fire. Her notes in the margins feel like whispers from another life. One line always stays with me. Freedom is not the absence of walls, but the decision to walk through the door. I walked through mine. I don't know if my son will ever reach out again. Maybe one day he will. Maybe he'll show up at this cabin with eyes heavy from regret, Maybe he won't. Either way, I'll be fine. Because I've learned that closure isn't something they give you, it's something you choose to take. Every scar I carry now reminds me of a truth I wish I had known sooner. Love should never cost you your dignity. Respect should never be begged for. And silence, when used wisely, can be louder than any revenge. If you're watching this, maybe you've been through something similar. Maybe someone you trusted turned your kindness into a weapon. Maybe you've been made to feel small in your own home, your own life. If that's you, I want you to remember this: there's always a door. It might be locked, it might seem impossible, but it's there. And once you walk through it, the world on the other side is yours again. My story didn't end when I lost my family. It began when I found myself. The sea doesn't ask permission to rise. The sun doesn't apologize for shining again after the storm. And neither should you. So I wake each morning to the same ritual: coffee, light, stillness, and thank the world for another day of peace I built with my own 2 hands. No one can lock that away from me. If my son ever watches this, I hope he understands one thing. I didn't leave to punish you. I left to remind you of what respect costs when it's taken for granted. I hope you learn. I truly do. But whether you do or not, I'm already free. And to those of you listening, tell me, where are you watching from? And what time is it where you are? Maybe, in your own way, you're ready to walk through your own door too. Because sometimes revenge isn't about what you take back, it's about what you finally let go. And that's my true story.